Welcome to 4RG Meets. My name is Scott McKinley, and this lovely human beside me is my co-host, Beth McKinley. And we want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Your very presence always brings us a lot of encouragement in knowing that people are willing to show up and learn and discuss topics related to climate change and climate justice. We've got a great topic for this evening, a topic that given our demographics in this group, has probably crossed most of our minds in one way or another: end of life disposition. As environmentalists, most of us would probably prefer to leave this earth with as small a carbon footprint as possible. And we're so pleased to have Terry Moore with us this evening to explore one way of doing that. But first, there's a few announcements and other business. Beth, could you...
Yeah, so I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and acknowledge that many members of 4 grandchildren are situated on the traditional lands of the Mississauga and the Chippewa nations, an area covered by Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaties. And today, across Canada, we marked Remembrance Day, recognizing the contribution of all Canadians to military and peacekeeping efforts. However, you may or may not know there is an Indigenous Veterans Day, which is November the 8th, and it is honoring the really unique circumstances under which Indigenous people participated in military and peacekeeping. These involve things like traveling great distances to enlist, learning new languages, adapting to not just the military culture, but other cultural differences. And Indigenous people brought with them skills from their hunting traditions. And so they were very successful as snipers, as scouts. Their patience, their stealth, their marksmanship were really important. Many were decorated for bravery. And there were Cree soldiers involved in using the Cree language to code messages. Unfortunately, Canada did not offer many of these veterans the same benefits that were extended to other veterans. I'll put a link in the chat if you'd like to learn more about this, and I'd like to offer my gratitude, miigwech, to the Indigenous nations and peoples for all their contributions to ensure the health of these lands, waters, and people.
Now, for those that have not been with us before at 4RG Meets, we are a arm of 4R Grandchildren, which is a climate action group based here in Peterborough, Nov2024. Our mission is to engage and mobilize people to take effective action in response to the climate crisis. 4RG has several very active committees, so you can learn more and find out ways to become active in our group by checking out our website, which is at 4rgrandchildren.ca. All right, Terry Moore has been formally retired since 2010 after working for 26 years as a staff representative and negotiator with the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. He continues to operate a small union side interest arbitration consultancy. Prior to this, he worked as a research associate with Ontario New Democratic Party Research at Queen's Park in Toronto for 5 years, preceded by a 5-year term as provincial coordinator with the Ontario Public Interest Research Group at the University of Waterloo. After retiring, Terry moved to Haliburton County, became a board member with the Environment Haliburton Group, EH, an organization for which he currently holds the position of vice president. After the death of their son, Kyle, in 2019, Terry and his wife, Shirley, helped found the charitable NGO Haliburton Highlands Green Burial Society, and they remain its president and secretary treasurer, respectively. The HHGBS has been doing a lot of work raising the profile of green or natural burial by speaking in a wide variety of forms. 2020, Terry helped found Seniors for Climate Action Now, who a lot of us know that is SCAN, and continues to be an active member of SCAN's education campaigns platform towards bad energy and climate adaptation committees. Terry and Shirley live on Halls Lake in Algonquin Highlands, have 2 daughters, Devin and Aislinn, and 2 grandchildren, Kyle and Avrea. So, without any further ado, I think if Terry, if you could unmute if you haven't already, and we're ready to hear from you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I want to thank 4RGrandchildren for the invitation to be part of tonight's conversation about green burial and climate and other environmental legacies. Final disposition choices can pass on to future generations. The tagline on the 4RG logo reminds us that our legacy is their future. While greener natural burial is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, as well as the other members of the Haliburton Highlands Green Burial Society, it might surprise you that it's not a top of mind discussion for most people, even environmentalists and climate activists. As a result, opportunities to talk about why we should care about greening our end of life practices don't happen every day. So I want to thank Sharon Hill and Beth and Scott McKinley in particular for the invitation and all participants for taking the time to join in. I'm going to try to keep my comments as short as possible in order to maximize the amount of time available for any comments or questions you might want to put on the table after the presentation. I'd like to begin by fleshing out a little bit of my personal history and about how and when I came to be a member of the Green Burial movement. I attended university during the student activist wave at the end of the 60s and into the 70s, coincident with the rise of the modern environmental movement and the appearance of ecology as a distinct academic discipline. The ideas that captured my attention and encouraged me to take action at the time were embodied in books like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, Barry Commoner's The Closing Circle, and the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth. While I joined and supported many environmental campaigns and organizations over the next 60 years, I managed to remain totally ignorant of the one part of that movement hiding in plain sight, the greener natural burial movement. It completely escaped my attention, and I don't think I was alone. My ignorance on this front extended for decades, all the way to 2019, when a tragic death in our family brought us face to face with the incredible work being done by thousands of activists bent on bringing the same critical lens to bear on the ecological impact of human end-of-life practices as the environmental activists had been focusing on essentially every other aspect of modern industrial society. Our son, Kyle, as was mentioned, died in February of 2019 at age of 36. Exactly 1 month ago, Kyle would have turned 42 on October the 11th. Kyle's first encounter with brain cancer happened at 5 years of age in 1987. After surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, he was left with some significant limitations, but survived, in many ways thrived, and remained in remission for another 25 wonderful years. Kyle's life and death is why I'm speaking to you about green burial tonight, a topic I knew nothing about just 5 short years ago. Kyle's death Kyle, in 2015, Kyle was diagnosed with a secondary tumor caused by the very radiation treatment that helped save his life when he was 5. We were so focused on the treatment and recovery that we never found the time for a proper end-of-life discussion. Now, Kyle really was the stereotypical tree hugger with a deep sense of connection to the larger natural world, a sensitivity which we were determined to honor by making the most ecologically informed end-of-life choices we could on his behalf. That forced us, with the assistance of an incredible end-of-life doula, to think long and hard about the ecological and social impacts of how human bodies are dealt with in our culture, as well as the choices that were and weren't available to us. I'd like to share some of what we discovered about the dominant forms of human disposition, conventional burial, and fire cremation. The ecological footprint of conventional burial typically includes the use of embalming fluid, with the chemical of choice being formaldehyde, a known human carcinogen. This has both occupational and environmental health impacts. And the funeral industry uses a lot of this. It has been estimated that the US in the US, over 15 million liters of toxic embalming fluid, enough to fill 6 Olympic swimming pools, is buried along with human remains each and every year. Ooh, what happened? Okay. Conventional burial also typically involves the use of highly finished and biodegradably resistant caskets. If that's a word, biodegradably resistant, I think it is. The volume of hardwood buried in cemeteries every year, again in the United States, is estimated at 150 million board feet. In trying to understand and communicate the scale of that number, the US-based Green Burial Council estimates that it equates to 1 inch by 12-inch planks laid end to end, 1.4 times around the entire circumference of the planet. That's a lot of wood. Conventional burial also involves the use of grave liners or vaults, at least in many cases. Most of the common, whoops, I'm sorry, my mouse is going crazy. What's that about? To go back, conventional burial often, and in many cases, in many cemeteries, always uses the grave liners or vaults. The most common materials out of which they are made are fiberglass and metal. The amount of concrete and steel buried annually in the US cemeteries would pave a new interstate highway from Washington to Baltimore. That's 39 miles or 63 kilometers every year. In more Canadian terms, that's about the same distance as between Peterborough and Oshawa. Conventional cemeteries also have impressive material energy needs and generate significant carbon footprints from the use of individual memorial headstones with their concrete foundations. They also feature lawn-like mowed areas that require regular maintenance. This requires the use of fossil-fueled lawn maintenance equipment and is often paired with the application of significant amounts of herbicides to control unwanted vegetation. And with respect to fire cremation, which many people consider to be a relatively environmentally benign way to go, on average, each individual cremation injects approximately 240 kilograms or 530 pounds of carbon dioxide into our atmospheric commons. CO2 levels in the atmosphere are now regularly measuring in excess of 420 parts per million in the face of a scientifically recognized so-called safe boundary of 350 parts per million. This dangerously excessive level of CO2 has led the world's climate science community to call for immediate and deep cuts to emissions and the end to any further fossil fuel infrastructure development, especially within the global north. With over 330,000 deaths in Canada in 2023, CO2 emissions from cremations have been estimated to amount to over 80 million metric tons, an amount equal to or greater than the entire 2022 national emissions of 9 signatory countries under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In addition to CO2, cremation emits dioxins, furans, carbon monoxide, and a host of other persistent organic pollutants. The ashes created by fire cremation are highly alkaline and toxic to the plants they touch when scattered without being diluted with large quantities of neutralizing compost or soil. In the face of the significant environmental impacts of conventional burial and fire cremation as just outlined, what does green or natural burial have to offer as an alternative? The Green Burial Society of Canada defines green burial as a way of caring for the dead with minimal environmental impacts while promoting the sustainability and protection of natural resources, worker health and safety, the reduction of carbon emissions, and the use of toxic chemicals. To help operationalize that definition, the Green Burial Society also has put together a series of 5 principles of green burial. Those principles include no embalming, direct earth burial, by which it means the removal of as many of the barriers to direct contact between the body and earth as possible, ecological restoration and conservation, particularly bringing cemeteries back into harmony with what their original native plant populations were. Communal memorialization, I'll come back to that in a minute, and the optimizing of land use. Here are some images to help clarify what these principles look like in practice. Instead of this or this, green burial looks more like this or this. So you'll see in the right-hand pictures, that's a willow, a woven willow casket, and the lower picture on the right is a shroud. And with respect to green burial cemeteries or hybrid sections within existing conventional cemeteries, the goal for them is to look more like this and less like this and this. The fourth Green Burial Society of Canada principle, communal versus individual memorialization, is directed at reducing the amount of material currently being buried along with our loved ones while reducing financial, energy, and carbon costs at the same time. Here are some additional images of what communal memorialization actually looks like on the ground. But keep in mind, practices vary, quite significantly from green burial cemetery to green burial cemetery. These are some of the images that I've collected from Canadian sites. The cost of end-of-life choices is a critical consideration for many families. This impossibly complex chart, and I'm not going to ask you to do anything other than just cut to the bottom line shortly, was produced using information collected in August of 2022 by Jen Watt, a member of the Green Burial Society board, based on conversations she had with 2 funeral homes operating within Haliburton County. This chart is useful in that it lists most of the things seen in the left-hand column that will directly affect the relative cost between conventional burial, cremation, and green burial. However, it does not cover all of the expenses that might be encountered, including, for example, extra fees that might be charged by municipalities for non-residents, or variable and optional discretionary costs associated with hosting funeral receptions or celebrations of life. The cost of a green burial or versus cremation may be more advantageous than this chart indicates if the family is prepared and the cemetery operator allows some of the functions most often performed by funeral homes, such as transportation of the body to the cemetery, to be assumed by family members and or friends. Having said that, as you can see, green or natural burial has a lower price range than either traditional burial or cremation, and depending on personal and family choices, can be the most economical choice. Our green burial education and advocacy work with the Society has led us to identify some key barriers to its widespread adoption. These include the lack of knowledge about the environmental footprint of traditional burial and cremation practices, the lack of availability of green burial options, the absence of winter burial options in many smaller and rural communities, and finally, the growth of cremation as the preferred end-of-life option. As I mentioned earlier, the main North American Funeral Industry Association estimated in 2023 that the cremation rate in Canada was 75% and predicted that it would reach 80% by 2030. As a result, cemetery operators are more inclined to install columbariums, as this picture shows, rather than building green burial sections. However, our experience over the last 5 years leads us to believe that there's a very significant and growing interest in ecologically sustainable alternatives to cremation in particular. Despite the trend toward fire cremation, we have been able to make some clear progress in Haliburton County. 2 townships, Highlands East and Algonquin Highlands, have each decided to create a green burial section within one of their existing cemeteries. St. Stephen's Cemetery in Algonquin Highlands and the Deer Lake Cemetery in Highlands East. Algonquin Highlands, has also decided to provide winter burials. Both green burial sections are scheduled to open in 2025. I'd like to quickly show you some images from both of those green burial sections. Here's the Deer Lake Cemetery in Highlands East on the Loop Road south of Highland Grove in the geographical township of Cardiff. This is a tour that we took of the actually set aside green burial section. And here's the St. Stephen's Cemetery on Buckslide Road in the former geographical township of Stanhope, not far from both Boschkong and Halls Lake, where our son Kyle is buried, immediately adjacent to the barrier with the new green burial section. Note the newly built gazebo, jointly paid for by the township and the society, that will serve as a shelter and a place of reflection for family members attending an interment or a subsequent visit. Both St. Stephen's and Deer Lake are relatively small, only 1/3 of an acre or so, and will provide approximately 160 burial plots each. However, we think the importance of these two green burial sections outstrips their size. When people first discover green burial, most find the idea very attractive, in theory. Motivating significant numbers to press for the creation of publicly provided green burial options is more difficult in the absence of already existing real-world examples that people can see and experience firsthand. That's now about to change in Haliburton County and a growing number of other communities due to the hard work of the Green Burial Society of Canada, the Natural Burial Association which is headquartered in Ontario, working in partnership with local activist groups like the Haliburton Highlands Green Burial Society. As far as green burial options closer to Peterborough is concerned, the Maple Grove Cemetery in Havelock created a green burial section in 2023 and is considering adding provision of winter burial. Carrie Hoskins, the owner of a beautiful 180-acre property in Bobcaygeon, has been fighting her way through the provincial and local planning approval process for a decade or so in an effort to create a standalone all-green natural burial ground. Carrie thinks that she's closer to the end of the process than the beginning. There are a number of existing green burial sections located in geographical proximate communities not too far from Peterborough, including the St. James Cemetery in Roseneath and the Coburg Union Cemetery in Coburg. The Natural Burial Association maintains a comprehensive listing of green and natural burial cemeteries and sections on its website, a link to which I've included in a resource list for tonight's meeting. I'm coming to the end of my formal presentation. I've just got two slides left. In a recent blog I wrote for Seniors for Climate Action Now, SCAN, I offered some thoughts on the connection between the climate emergency and green burial. While it's absolutely true that as compared to the larger sources of climate-killing greenhouse gas emissions, like the oil and gas industry, carving time to promote green and natural burial sections and lower individual carbon-intensive disposition choices can appear small and insignificant. At the same time, it's my view that efforts to encourage and support more ecologically sustainable end-of-life choices can help build the social and political will to drive down greenhouse gas emissions as far and as fast as needed to pass on a livable climate to future generations. I want to end by referencing a great 2015 book by the Green Burial Movement activist author Suzanne Kelly, entitled Greening Death: Reclaiming Burial Practices and Restoring Our Tie to the Earth. In my view, it is essential reading for anybody interested in how the green burial movement was created, its successes and failures, as well as its future prospects. Kelly believes that the most important long-term impact of the green burial movement may lie in its capacity to encourage people to view and treat human bodies as important sources of life-supporting nutrients and not as waste to be dumped into an already overpolluted atmosphere. She further argues that by reinforcing the fact that humans are part rather than apart from the larger natural world, the green burial movement can be instrumental in restoring our ties to the earth and our capacity to leave a truly livable climate legacy for future generations. I'm going to leave it there and end the screen sharing, and hopefully we can now go on to some comments and questions. Thank you for your attention.
All right, Terry, before we open the floor to questions, I just want to say thank you so much for all of this, and also to offer our condolences to you and your family on the tragic loss of your son. From what you've said about Kyle, I suspect he would be thrilled to know that you and your wife have turned your attention to teaching more and more people about this. And if you think about how that's rippling out in terms of the environmental impact being reduced, it's really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, it ticks all the boxes, you know, as a lifelong environmentalist. So Terry and I actually discovered that we were both at Waterloo University, separated by about 5 years, but involved with an environmental group on campus. So things come around. You know, for me, we've been talking about making arrangements and plans, and we keep on putting it off. But I think that this will inspire us to actually do something, because this is a really palatable option. Minimizing, you know, carbon emissions, the use of toxic chemicals, the use of natural resources, trees, wise land use. I was driving by a cemetery the other day just thinking, wow, there's 8 billion people on the earth right now. And of course, not everybody is buried the way we are in North America, but that's a lot of resources. So to have this information ahead of time, to be able to make arrangements when we're not in the midst of grief is really important. I also really want to thank Sharon Hill, because she's the one that connected us with you. Sharon Hill is involved with For Our Grandchildren, and I don't think she's here today. She had another obligation, but she's very interested in connecting with people that want to explore green burial options and forming like a small working group within For Our Grandchildren. So she said that I could share her email address in the chat with people. So I will do that.
Okay. Also, you mentioned a number of different resource links, Terry, and what we've done is, if you go into the 4RG webpage under 4RGMeets, under Terry's presentation advert, if you will, there is a list of resources there and various websites and ways of becoming involved and learning more, etc. So there's a good range of resources listed there for you. And so now it's your turn, and I see a bunch of hands up already. And so we'll go to some of these hands, and Beth will, in the meantime, she'll start checking out some of the questions and things that are in the chat section. But let's start with Jane Wyatt, and don't forget to unmute yourself when you go to ask your question.
My arrangements are already made. I paid for cremation and then found out that aquamation was more environmentally friendly, so I went to that. So I would now like a green burial. Do you know if I can cancel, or do you know how I go about changing this?
So my experience with cancellation of pre-existing arrangements is limited to purchase of conventional burial plots, and assuming that the bylaws of a cemetery provide for this, the law actually requires the cemetery to purchase back at current value what that plot is worth, minus what's called care and maintenance expenses. And so that's what that's what the rules would be in the case of a purchase of a conventional burial plot. With respect to aquamation, I don't know, but I would suggest that the fine print of whatever contract that you may have signed should be the first place to look with respect to what might be available to you in terms of cancellation. You could also check in with the burial Authority of Ontario. They're pretty responsive to consumer requests for information about how to protect their interests. And they're the regulatory authority for the entire funeral end of life industry in Ontario. And so aquamation providers come within their jurisdiction. So I would think, check the contract you sign, but then also make a call to the Burial Authority of Ontario to get their advice.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Great. Just before we go to Monique, I wonder, could you comment at all on aquamation and how it kind of lines up with the type of green burial that you've been talking about?
So the principal approach that we have to end of life choices is to privilege those that actually treat the body as essential nutrients for the continuing renewal of the cycle of life, death giving birth to new life, and so on. Some of the concerns that many of us have with respect to aquamation is that those same nutrients are removed from any connection with where your remains maybe end up being buried, and essentially become part of the water system. I mean, they end up, going into water treatment plants and so on. So the issue there is that the question is that the best use of the tremendous nutrients and resources that our bodies represent, for continuing the cycle of life. So, I'm not a particular fan of aquamation or fire cremation for that particular reason, is that it sort of treats the human body as not as nutrients but as waste.
Okay, thank you. Monique, you have your hand up there.
Yeah, so I started doing research around this about 3 years ago, and I landed on aquamation. So I haven't made any pre-plans or anything because I'm hoping that there will be better options a little bit down the road before I put some money down. But so I hadn't thought about the piece about the nutrients going back into the soil. For me, living in Peterborough, it's not available really locally. And so if I wanted to do this, then there's the I guess the waste of having to to transport me to another location. And so I was trying to figure out the best way that's going to be the most environmentally, that's not going to emit toxins at least into the environment. Yeah, so I guess my question was going to be about aquamation too, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out what the pros and cons are of, what the expenses are, what the impacts are on the environment. If I have to have my body transported to Coburg or Havelock or whatever, like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And when I was pricing things at aquamation was the cheapest of the three that I was looking at, right? I looked at green burial, but when I saw that it was in Coburg, I have no ties to Coburg, not that I think that I'm going to be, that's really important, but I mean, there's no connection to Coburg for me or Havelock. So I don't know if I really want to be there. I don't need to be anywhere. Yeah, anyways, I'm rambling, but just some thoughts coming to mind about, I'm still trying to figure this out. And yeah, just wanting to know pros and cons, I suppose.
You're not alone with grappling with those kinds of questions. And what I would encourage you to do is to find others to help you think through this process. When our family was trying to figure out what to do after Kyle died, finding an end-of-life doula was just an amazing, find for us. I mean, it helped us in the depths of grief to be able to sort ourselves out. And so if you're doing pre-planning, the use of an end-of-life doula is really valuable. These folks specialize in helping people work through these kinds of difficult decisions and sort out the kinds of pros and cons, and also make sure that you're not being, how can I put it, being motivated by promotional information that may have a tangential relationship with reality, if I can put it that way.
Well said. Yeah.
A tangential relationship with reality. I'm going to remember that.
That's a good expression.
That's very, very tactful.
Peter and/or Jean Jackson.
Well, Terry, thank you first of all for your presentation, and your willingness to share personal information brings this subject very much to life. So first of all, thank you. I was delighted to hear that the National Burial Association maintains a list of available green burial sites. That's been one of my questions. But I've got three questions, if I can put them to you. The first of all is where is the best place to start trying to organize a green burial? Should we look for a knowledgeable funeral director who would know, I would hope, a lot of the practical details that we would need to sort out? Or should we go looking for a green burial plot and buy that first and then chain backwards to find a funeral director who knows how to put us in it, but not too soon?
Uh-huh.
The second question has to do with choosing a funeral home. Is there a similar list of funeral homes or funeral directors who are knowledgeable about green burial? That was the second question. The third one is, does the choice of a green burial in any way affect the timeline during which a green burial has to be conducted? And I'm thinking, for example, of the lack of embalming, injecting urgency to get the body buried quickly.
Okay. Maybe I can deal with that last question first, because in some sense it's easier.
Okay.
Many funeral homes have cooling paraphernalia that can help chill the body and keep it viable for an extended period of time for burial. For example, if you're making arrangements with family to attend the funeral or a celebration of life and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of occasions when there could be delays, and funeral homes do have access. Now it varies depending on their need, and you know, the scope of what their experience is and so on. But I should ask you to, when you connect, if you do connect with a funeral parlor or a funeral home, there are other supports that they can offer, which you need to pay attention to. And that brings me then to the next two questions, which are, is there a list of funeral homes that are green burial savvy? The answer is no. Overall list. But what would be a useful thing to do would to touch base with local green burial organizations, because or organizations that represent people, like sometimes burial societies focus on purchasing, caskets, for example, at the best price that's available. There are burial societies in some parts of Ontario that are not green burial societies, but assist anybody across all dispositions, who may be able to provide you with some advice with regard to the selection of a particular funeral director, or to stay away from somebody who, let's say, has a reputation for upselling, or that sort of thing. Okay.
Yes.
So, I encourage you to touch base with local groups, who would have some experience dealing with the local funeral director industry. you were talking about where's the best place to start. Is it to buy a green burial plot, or to try to arrange a conversation, I take it, with somebody about planning before you arrange
Yes.
a plot? There's a couple of things I just want to mention here, is that not all green burial cemeteries provide winter burial.
Okay.
That's one thing that you need to nail down right away. It's one of the reasons why the Haliburton Highlands Green Burial Society from day one has been arguing for year-round green burial to be brought into Haliburton County, because it made no sense to us, for anybody to purchase a plot if you can't use it for half the year.
Right.
Right. So pre-purchase and pre-planning is kind of, under those circumstances, is diminished. And so, you need to cover off things like that. If you, I'm going to mention end-of-life doulas again, because I do think that they are worth their weight generally in gold.
Okay.
They can assist you in coming to some amicable outcomes within a family that may have disagreements, for example. Not everybody in a family completely agrees about everything having to do with final disposition. And end-of-life doulas, if you find a good one, like we happen to live right beside, Adrienne Weller, who lives in Haliburton County, she was fantastic and really was able to help us work through some tensions and some differences, but also to deal directly with the funeral directors, the funeral homes, and put questions to them that we were not in a position to put, given what had happened. We were in major grief time. Now, if you're doing pre-planning, you may not need that, but think about using an end-of-life doula. And I didn't put that in the resource list, but there is an organization of end-of-life doulas which provides contact information from around the province. And I'll find that and make some way of making that available to you.
If you send that to us, Terry, we'll post it when we post the recording.
Perfect. I'll do that.
Yeah, it'll be on the website, as are all the other resources that you sent us. They're already up there.
Thank you so much. Excellent answers.
All right, Janet has a question.
Hi. So I've never ever wanted to be buried. And I didn't want to be cremated, but my original option that I thought was the smartest was to give my body to science. But I haven't looked into it to find out what they do with the remains. So maybe what they do with the remains after they do their thing educationally with the body is not something I would choose. So I guess, Terry, I'm wondering if you know anything about, I want to make a useful choice at the end of life. And I thought the most useful thing was science. But if they're going to automatically cremate the remains or whatever, then I have to rethink that and maybe go for the green burial. But I'm really not convinced that 100% that green burial is a useful end to my time on the planet or yet. So whereas giving my body to science is to me, it's a useful option. So I'm just interested in your thoughts about that.
Sure. And I mean, this in some ways is similar to folks who sign the organ donation thing attached to your driver's license and so on. The short answer is to say that you need to check the fine print with respect to the institution to which you want to, give your body. Ones that I'm familiar with preserve the body with things like formaldehyde, because the work that they use the body for is often to train new generations of medical practitioners. Okay, that's one thing. So that's not the only use, okay, but that's one of the uses. And I think that that's why I'm suggesting that you need to follow the paper trail, follow, you know, the fine print, and find out exactly what your body would be used for and whether or not you'd be comfortable with that use, but also what happens to your body after its useful period has expired, you know, with that institution. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be the best course of action, because I do know that in some cases they use preservatives. Now that would not stop you from being buried in all conventional cemeteries that I'm aware of, and a good number of green burial cemeteries as well, because some green burial cemeteries, while they prefer people not to be embalmed, the bylaws may not have an absolute prescription to it. It depends on the details of this and the rules that cemetery has written. Okay, and so you would need to investigate that as well. If you happen to be embalmed, but you wanted to be buried, and you wanted to be buried, you know, in a particular cemetery in a particular section, you need to basically make sure that what the rules are for that particular section, because they vary from place to place.
Okay, thank you.
Great question, because yeah, we all signed. Oh, we don't all. A lot of us signed donor cards, and yeah, what happens there? I was reading myself about that a little bit earlier, and a lot of them use aquamation, I think, as well. Jane has another question.
Yes, I donated my body to science, and my understanding when I did that was that I pay for it to go where it's needed, and then it's returned, and then whatever arrangements I've made, which was aquamation, would be done. So I'll have to do some research on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the devil is always in the detail.
Phil McKenzie.
Hi, hi Terry.
Hi.
We have recently been approached, I'm with Climate Action Muskoka, by someone who mentioned a mushroom vault that people would be buried in, and this person is interested in pursuing a green burial society. And I wonder if you knew anything about that.
Well, I know something about it. I don't know as much as I probably should. There are all sorts of alternatives that are being discussed and developed out there, and depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, some of them are actually legal. And so you need to be clear on what your jurisdiction allows and what it doesn't allow. So, for example, human composting, which is, you know, similar in some respects to being placed in a kind of a mushroom pod, you know, is legal in certain places, but it's not legal in Ontario. Now, I don't think that there's any legal barrier, though, to being placed inside of a mushroom pod and then buried in a conventional burial. I must admit, I do not know about what the attitude toward that would be with respect to any existing green burial cemeteries, which is another reason why we all need to ask the questions, right? If we're being drawn to a particular type of end of life practice that we might want to choose, we need to sort out, you know, all of the complications or all the potential issues associated with it. And that's again another reason I keep coming back, and I'm sorry I'm going to sound like a broken record, to talk to end of life doulas. They work in this territory all the time, and they have much more experience dealing with the nitty gritty of people's investigations of end of life choices. So that together with local folks and funeral directors, you know, we've had the luck in Haliburton County of having two funeral directors who are quite supportive of green burial, do not view it as being in competition, and generally speaking have have gone out of their way to assist people being able to plan the type of disposition they want, and not, you know, sort of defaulting to the norms within the industry. So check out, you know, and get advice from the funeral directors about what is and isn't allowed, the pros and cons, and then also, I mean, don't hesitate to call the Burial Authority of Ontario. They have a good consumer advocacy section, and they'll answer you those type of questions as well as anybody can, I think.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Yeah, we've certainly got some research to do on this topic.
I forgot to mention two organizations which I ought to have, and I did in the presentation: the Green Burial Society of Canada and the Natural Burial Association. You know, Mark Richardson at the Green Burial Society of Canada and Susan Greer at the Natural Burial Association are wonderful sources of information. And if they don't have the answer, they'll find it, and they actually answer email.
Okay, thank you.
Nervous, wow.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, Rosemary.
Rosemary is up next. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. And this is a very necessary conversation. We're a death-denying culture, I think. And so this is answering a lot of our needs. I just want to add 2 points from experience. By my age, I have had bereavements. One is Maya Angelou said, "When we know better, we do better." And this is a kind of a growing field of new knowledge that conscientious people like everybody here tonight is going to act on or decide on. My husband died 10 years ago, and at that point, we bought a plot in Little Lake, which is a very beautiful cemetery here in Peterborough, and it's municipally owned, so the politics were good. I don't think we decided on cremation. That's 10 years ago. I think we would change that decision now. But I also think, I just want to offer this for everybody's consideration. Location is very important if you have children and grandchildren. And if you believe in rituals, remembering rituals. Look at what we had today on November 11th, a remembrance ritual with music and speeches and poetry. And so I think you have to consider your loved ones and the future and a place to come and express warm memories and love to the one who has died. So with those parameters, you're sometimes limited, as people have already said. There's no easy way to have a green burial right here in Peterborough at the moment, but we can lobby for the provision of such to be in the future.
Yeah, just on that, my experience with talking to whatever level of government's got the responsibility to manage cemeteries. In the case of Haliburton County, it's the townships have the responsibility to manage the public cemeteries. They all, when we did presentations back in 2019 to every single council, every one of them in principle liked the idea. Mm-hmm. The problem is putting that principle into action in times when every politician will say they're strapped for cash, that there's a crisis on the financial side, the province is just simply downloading things that the lower tier cannot possibly manage, and that this would result, if they incur more costs, would result in increased property taxes. You know, one of the things the Natural Burial Society did was comprehensive opinion surveys, and what those surveys show is that a very large majority of people would like to see green burial options, and they are not very expensive to create. And so the various associations can help disabuse politicians of the notion that these are incredibly expensive things to do. it is not difficult or technically or financially, I believe, for townships to create green burial sections within already established cemeteries. It has less maintenance, care and maintenance generally attached to it. And all the other costs and so on are no more expensive, with the possible exception of winter burial. And in Haliburton County, what they've decided to do is in Algonquin Highlands is that they're doing a cost plus thing. It's passed on at 100% cost recovery to the family. Now, we didn't raise a whole bunch of objections to that because we think that overall, when you take into account the fact that there's not a need for an expensive casket and so on and so forth, that in the end, a green burial, even when you're paying for the winter burial top up, is a good deal in relationship to the other dispositions. But I think the key here is to advocate and to clearly communicate with your elected councillors about the desire to have green burial options in every community, year-round green burial options.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Terry, and that is, I live just near Peterborough. If I wanted to have my body put into a green burial site in Havelock or Coburg, how does my body get there?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's no requirement that your body be delivered by a funeral home or funeral director. Your family could if they're so disposed.
Just hitch up the trailer on the back of the vehicle,
That's
put
right.
the body in and go? Like,
No.
is it not legal situation?
What I need to add here, though, is that because we're in discussions with Algonquin Highlands, who've never done green burial at all, ever, let alone winter burial, they're now trying to think through all the rules associated with how they want to perform green burials and so on. And they want to make sure that somebody who knows what they're doing is actually present graveside, for the transport of a body from whatever vehicle that it arrives in to the grave without causing any problems for anybody, right? And so what they're doing in Algonquin Highlands is that they've written into the draft bylaw a requirement for the presence of a funeral director. They don't have to transport the body, but they have to be present graveside and to receive the body and to make sure that it's transported properly to the grave. So, those kinds of issues, will be present, but there's no requirement for you to hire out or for your family to hire out. The family could do it, So that's one option, certainly, that a lot of families are considering as part of the kind of do-it-yourself funeral movement.
I think, unless there's any other questions, that's probably going to wrap it up for us.
Yeah.
And this has been very informative, and it's been interesting watching the questions coming from everybody, because they're very intelligent questions and very thoughtful questions, and it's much appreciated. So this has been great.
Yes, thank you for everything, for the time that you put into this, the resources that I've mentioned, and I'll say it again. Terry provided us with a full page of resources, and we've posted them on 4rgrandchildren.ca under the 4RGMeets tab. And Terry, if you want to just add the End of Life Doula organization, we'll replace the PDF that we posted this afternoon with that one, which will be complete. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
If I can just add one final thing, because my board would want me to, is to indicate that we're always looking for new members of the Haliburton Highlands Green Burial Society, and we don't only limit ourselves to Haliburton County. Our website is open to anybody, obviously, who wants to visit it. And so it has a resource center, a resource tab on that website, which has advice about end-of-life disposition for people who are, whether or not they're considering a green burial. There's templates to use for planning purposes and so on. So there's a variety of connections there. So visit the website, use it, because we designed it to be used by the broader community. And the other thing I would say, two things, is that consider becoming a member. There's also a donation tab, and we're always interested in donations, and we are now a registered charity. So
wonderful. Thank you.
I've included links to those places in the resource list.
Good, as you should. Great. Yeah. So yeah, we have some comments coming in. Very informative. Thank you. This is a public service, says Rosemary. Right. Okay. Well, good night, everyone. We'll be back in January with our next 4RG meets. We're not exactly sure when. We're still looking for, we're always open for ideas. So tonight was because one of our members, Sharon Hill, approached us and suggested this. So if anyone here tonight, if you have an idea of something that you think would make a good presentation, especially if you have a contact with someone who could be a speaker, please reach out to us. That would be fabulous. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Night, everyone.